In brightest day, in blackest night. Blah, 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 you know the rest. I think that oath's been a bit overused as of recently. But yeah, in case none of you know, yes, I have seen Green Lantern. And what is my opinion of it? Well, I thought it was pretty good. Uh, I didn't think that it was great, but I didn't quite think it was as bad as everybody else said it was. Uh, One thing I will definitely say, the special effects were pretty spectacular. I will definitely say that all the scenes that did not take place on Earth were great. They were fantastic. I loved the scenes on Oa. I loved the scenes with like where all the lanterns were together. I loved the whole "Long Live the Core" thing. I loved that. However, it's when the movie actually centers itself on Earth when it flares many of its many flaws. Um, a lot of people complained that there's way too much screen time given with Hal and the human characters. I kind of felt that the one character who had a bit too much screen time was Hector Hammond. Now, here's the way I feel about Hector Hammond. That I thought I'm not gonna go with the minority and say that Peter Sarsgaard was bad. I thought he was actually pretty good. I thought he was really creepy and disturbing as Hector Hammond. I thought that he pulled off the creepiness and the sort of eeriness that the Hector Hammond character from the comics has. But also, I think this movie just takes way too many liberties with the source material. As a comic book fan, I felt like it strayed a bit too far. Now, they stuck with the basic idea of Hal's origin story. He finds Abin Sur dying. He takes Abin Sur's ring from him. Hal actually becomes a green. Hal actually becomes a Green Lantern. He goes to Oa. He trains a little bit. Then everything that happens from there is purely made up. Everything that happens from there is purely taken for granted. Um, as I said, the scenes on Oa were terrific. I loved the visual effects. I loved the art design. I loved the way everything looked. My favorite Lantern character in the movie was tomar-re, but that's because I've always thought tomar-re was an awesome supporting character for Hal for any Green Lantern. Um, there were definitely some cool Easter eggs. I thought that having the Star Sapphire emblem on on the side of Carol Ferris's helmet during the fighter jet sequence was definitely cool. Um, I actually thought seeing the Sinestro Corps emblem was cool, but the movie just has a few inconsistencies and plot holes. Like, for example, throughout the movie they talk about how Parallax is heading towards Oa, when all of a sudden Parallax decides to head toward Earth. Now, I think I may know the reason behind this. I think the reason why Parallax decides to head towards Earth was because maybe he was controlling Hector Hammond through the little piece of Parallax that was stuck inside of Abin Sur's corpse whenever Hector Hammond actually did the alien autopsy on Abin Sur. But that's a very big if. Um, I they just didn't explain that. Because does Hector Hammond become like a fragment of Parallax's consciousness? They never explained that. They never explained why Parallax developed such a big interest towards going to Earth. and thus the only reason Parallax really has any interest in coming to Earth is because I guess that's where Hector Hammond is, and I guess because, since this is a movie about the human Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, I guess they just needed some kind of threat to loom over Earth. Another problem I had, as I said, with the Liberty, I had a problem with the liberties they took with the source material. A lot of the characters I felt were were very shallow echoes, or very big far cries from the way they are in the comic books. I think I could tell from the trailers that Blake Lively was going to be a really bad Carol Ferris, and after seeing the movie, my opinion has not changed. I still think she's a terrible actress, and I think she offered a pretty wooden performance as Carol. I mean, yeah, she was hot and everything, and Carol is definitely an attractive character, but another thing that Carol is supposed to be is that she's supposed to be strong, and she's supposed to be a very supportive and a very loving, a sort of a babysitter of Hal, I guess you could say. Because I think Ryan Reynolds did a good job of capturing the rashness and the sort of immaturity that Hal Jordan has. But I didn't really get the sense that he and Carol's relationship was, it just didn't feel right. It felt very awkward, and it just wasn't that well written. Uh, and another supporting character I thought that they shafted really badly, when I say shaft, I mean poorly executed, was Thomas Kalmaku, or Pie Face, as the comic book lovers like to call him. Now, I hated the way that they portrayed him in this movie. I really did. I didn't care for the fact that he was like a really nerdy, geeky, stuck-up computer guy who like made fun of Hal every chance he got. I didn't really like that. I thought that was a really bad way to adapt his character, because in the comics, Thomas was just a really funny and happy-go-lucky um, Inuit plane engineer, and I wish they would have made him that way in the movie, because I actually think his character would have been a lot more likable. It's sort of like the dynamic that Hal and Tom had in the comics was very similar to Iron Man and War Machine. It's very similar to the huge friendship and bond that Tony and Rhodey have. That they're supposed to be really close friends, but the way that they sort of act and argue with each other, they don't really, it doesn't really convince you that they are. However, I think as I said before, I think Hector Hammond was really cool in this movie. I thought that he was really disturbing, and that every scene he was in, he was really creepy. Also, the last character that I thought that I didn't like the way they did the Guardians. I thought that the Guardians were way too lazy and slow looking. The Guardians to me are supposed to be like people of action, but the Guardians in the movie, they just don't look like the type of people who looked like they've been working for thousands of years to build Oa and create the Green Lanterns and everything that they reap the benefits of. And also, I think the way they did Parallax was pretty. I thought the origin for Parallax was pretty crappy too, how he was once a Guardian that succumbed to the yellow element. Which brings me to another inconsistency. If one of the Guardians was vulnerable enough to fall victim to the seduction of the yellow element, then how come none of the other Guardians did too? They're supposed to be really intelligent and wise, and yet one of them just happens to fall victim to the yellow element that they all hate and fear. You'd probably think for all my bitching and whining that I really hated this movie, but in honesty, I really did enjoy it, and while I didn't think that it was fantastic, I thought it was decent, and I thought that it was a fun and enjoyable movie. That's all I have to say. Actually, I do have a couple more things to say about this movie because in the last part of the review, I mainly talked about all the stuff I didn't like about the movie, and it made it sound like I really hated the movie, even though I said that I really liked it. Now, the reason why I actually like this movie a lot is because as as bad as the flaws are, I do think that this was decent for Green Lantern's first live action movie. I thought that even though the way that the story was told was a bit contrived, I do think they did they did care about the source material and they did care about what they were doing. I certainly don't think it's as bad as everybody said it was. I think I heard one critic say that it was the worst comic book movie since Batman and Robin. So yeah, it's not bad by any means, but if you go into this expecting if you go into this expecting freaking something like Spider-Man 2 or The Dark Knight, then you're going to be pretty disappointed because it's nowhere near as good as those films. But I think that's why I think that this movie needs a sequel, because I think that this movie does a good job of showing us the world that the Green Lantern universe is set in. And for and like I said, the special effects and the action sequences are pretty damn good, in my opinion. I also think that as rushed as it was, Hal's final battle with Parallax was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool spectacle. And I realized actually throwing Parallax into the sun, I guess that would be the only good way that they could have actually done it. But this movie is flawed, yes, but I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed it a great deal. But as a Green Lantern fan, I did expect a little bit more, but it did satisfy my basic needs for what I wanted to see in a Green Lantern movie. However, I do want to ask one question. What did Sinestro do with that yellow power ring that he created along with the Guardians when they were about to combat Parallax? I'm serious. They never explain what happens. He just makes it and then they just decide to throw it away. I don't know.